No one wanted the beaten and wounded $2 Apache slave, until the lonely cowboy chose her as family. The town was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made every creak of a wagon wheel or whisper of wind feel louder than it should. Dust hung in the air like a thin curtain, settling over the wooden sidewalks and worn-out buildings. It was a small frontier town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business and looked the other way when it suited them. Today, the market square was alive with a different kind of tension, the kind that came from desperation and fear. People moved quickly, eyes darting, voices hushed, avoiding one another as if their thoughts were dangerous. And in the center of it all, on a rough, uneven patch of dirt, a young girl sat alone. Her clothes were torn and patched in several places, faded from the sun and dirtied by the long, cruel journey she had endured. Her bare feet rested on the dusty ground, blistered and bruised, and her small body shook slightly from exhaustion. She was barely 12, though the hardship she had faced made her look older. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands over her shoulders, a curtain that shielded her face from the world. She had learned to keep her gaze low, to avoid eye contact, because the world had taught her that most people would rather look away than see her pain. And today she had been placed on the market like an object, with a price hanging over her head, $2. People walked past her in a blur, their expressions mixed with pity, fear, or indifference. Some muttered to one another, saying she was troublesome or cursed, as if a child could carry such labels on her own. A few looked with curiosity, but most looked away quickly, unwilling to risk involvement. They whispered and pointed with eyes and fingers, passing judgment without knowing a single thing about her story. She had become invisible in the very place where she should have been protected. Her small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and her hands clenched the frayed edge of her shirt, holding on to the only thread of comfort she had left. The tiny piece of hope that someone, anyone, might see her as more than the price on her head. Her life had not been easy. She had been captured during a raid on her village months earlier. She had lost everything familiar in the blink of an eye, her home, her family, the laughter of her siblings, the comfort of her mother's arms. She had been forced to endure the cruelty of strangers, treated as a thing rather than a child, sold and resold, moved from one home to another, each stranger leaving marks on her body and soul. Every bruise, every scar on her skin told a story of suffering, but she kept them hidden beneath her clothes and her quiet demeanor. She had learned that the world was harsh, that kindness was rare, and that survival depended on being small, invisible, and obedient. The morning sun beat down relentlessly, the heat settling into the town like a heavy blanket. She squinted against the glare, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for something, anything, that might signal safety or kindness. Her stomach growled, empty for days, and she forced herself not to cry. Tears had become a luxury she could not afford. They only drew attention, and attention was dangerous in a place like this. She had learned that the world was full of people who would take advantage of weakness, people who would turn their backs when help was most needed. So she kept silent, kept small, kept waiting. A merchant with a stern face approached, his boots crunching in the dirt. He had been hired to oversee the sale, a man who had seen many children in his time, but few like her. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and she looked away quickly. There was no kindness there, no softness, only the cold calculation of a man who measured everything in money. $2, he called out, his voice sharp and businesslike. $2 and she's yours. His eyes scanned the crowd, daring anyone to challenge the price, to question the trade. No one stepped forward. The girl's heart sank further, a tiny ember of hope dimming in the harsh light of reality. She hugged herself, shivering despite the heat. She remembered the stories her mother had told her when she was very young, stories of brave girls who faced the world with courage, stories of family and love that promised safety. Those stories felt like distant echoes now, almost like they belonged to someone else. She missed her mother's voice, the warmth of her hands, the way her laughter could chase away the darkest fears. But those memories were sharp reminders of what she had lost. She swallowed hard, trying to keep the trembling from her lips. The townsfolk murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads, pitying her, others scoffed, whispering that she would never survive outside of her captor's control. "She's not worth it," one man muttered under his breath. "She'll just cause trouble." The girl's stomach knotted at the words, but she did not look up. She had learned long ago that listening to such opinions only made the burden heavier. She had learned to rely on herself, to protect the fragile hope that one day someone might see her differently. Then, out of the crowd, a figure appeared. A lone cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. His boots kicked up dust as he walked with a slow, deliberate pace, his gaze fixed on the girl. Unlike the others, he did not avert his eyes or mutter judgments. He paused a few feet away, studying her carefully, as if trying to read the story written on her tiny frame. There was a quietness about him, a calm presence that seemed almost out of place in the bustling, wary town. And yet there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of something that made the girl's heart pulse with a new and cautious curiosity, recognition. Someone was looking at her and seeing her. He did not speak immediately. He watched her, noting the way she flinched at passing hands, the way she hugged herself protectively, the tension in her shoulders. And then finally he spoke, his voice low but steady, carrying across the dusty square. "I'll take her," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight, and they drew the attention of the merchant and the crowd. Some gasped softly, others raised their eyebrows in surprise. Who would willingly take on a child that everyone else had discarded, labeled, and sold for so little? But the cowboy's gaze never wavered, fixed firmly on the girl as though he were making a promise he intended to keep. The merchant hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and motioned for him to step forward. $2, he repeated, his tone less confident now. The cowboy reached into his pocket and handed over the coins without a word, placing them carefully in the merchant's hand. The transaction was quick, almost anticlimactic, yet it changed everything. The girl did not move at first, unsure if this was real or another trick, another act of cruelty disguised as opportunity. But the cowboy stepped closer, kneeling slightly to bring himself to her level. "You're safe now," he said gently. "I'll take care of you." For the first time in months, maybe years, the girl's body relaxed slightly. She dared to look up and their eyes met. There was no pity in his gaze, no judgment, only a quiet determination and an offer of protection. Her lips trembled and a single tear escaped before she could stop it. The cowboy simply nodded, as if understanding that tears were not weakness but a sign of survival. He extended his hand, and after a long moment of hesitation, she took it. It was the first time anyone had held her hand and not used it to strike or control her. It was the first time she had felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of trust that someone might truly care. As he led her away from the market square, the townsfolk watched silently. Some shook their heads, muttering that the cowboy was foolish, that the girl would bring nothing but trouble. But others paused, something soft stirring in their hearts, a recognition that perhaps they had judged too quickly. The girl's small steps faltered at first, unsure of what lay ahead, but the cowboy's steady presence beside her made the journey easier. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, the world was not entirely cruel. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the dust of the town settled back into silence. The girl glanced back at the market square one last time, the place where she had been rejected by all, and took a deep breath. She did not know what the future held, or if she would ever be completely safe again. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. And sometimes, hope was the strongest thing a person could hold onto, even stronger than fear or pain. The cowboy led the girl along a narrow dirt path that wound away from the small town, past fields of dry grass and the occasional scraggly tree. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows, but the girl barely noticed. Her mind was full of questions and fears, and yet there was a strange sense of relief she could not explain. For the first time in many moons, spring had arrived at last, brushing the valley with fresh colors and life. The small garden behind the cabin was thriving, with bright green shoots of vegetables peeking from the soil and wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Birds returned in cheerful flocks, filling the mornings with song. For Maya, each new day brought a growing sense of wonder at the world around her. She had learned to notice the little details, the way the sun sparkled on dew-covered leaves, the scent of fresh earth after rain, and the quiet strength of the animals she tended. Every small observation made her feel connected to life in a way she had never experienced before. Daniel had also noticed the changes in her. Maya moved with confidence now, her steps steady as she carried buckets of water or tended the garden. Her laughter rang freely across the cabin yard, a sound that once would have been unthinkable. He often paused during chores to watch her, a quiet pride in his eyes. It was not simply that she had grown stronger physically, but that she had begun to trust herself, to see her own value, and to embrace the sense of belonging he had offered her. For Daniel, the bond they shared had grown into something deeper than he had expected, a family not defined by blood but by care, trust, and shared experience. Maya, too, was learning what family truly meant. The first time she realized it, she had been sitting on the cabin steps, watching Daniel fix a broken fence post. She had leaned against the railing and asked, "Do you think anyone will ever really care for me?" Daniel had stopped, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked down at her. "I care for you," he had said simply. "I've chosen you and I'm not going anywhere." Those words, plain as they were, filled her heart with a warmth she had never known. She began to understand that family could be chosen and built, not only inherited. Days turned into weeks, and their bond continued to grow. They worked together on the land, fixing fences, planting seeds, and harvesting crops. Maya had learned to ride a horse, starting with short rides around the cabin yard and eventually venturing into the hills under Daniel's careful supervision. Each ride was a thrill and a lesson in courage. She learned to trust the horse and, even more importantly, to trust herself. Her confidence grew with each challenge she overcame, and Daniel's encouragement was always there, steady and unwavering. Maya also began to explore her creativity. She discovered she could draw in the dirt with sticks, making patterns and shapes that delighted her. Daniel encouraged her, bringing her pieces of scrap paper and charcoal from the cabin to practice drawing. Sometimes she would draw animals, other times landscapes of the valley, and occasionally small scenes from her memories. Daniel admired her work and praised her gently, never making her feel rushed or pressured. This freedom to create was new to Maya, and it nurtured a sense of self-expression she had been denied for so long. One afternoon, while they were working in the garden, Maya noticed a small group of travelers passing near the edge of their property. They were a family, not unlike what she had once longed for, with children running and laughing. Maya's heart tightened at the sight. She had never experienced such normalcy, children playing, parents smiling, a sense of security she had never known. Daniel noticed the way she stiffened and followed her gaze. "It's okay to feel that way," he said softly. "You've been through a lot and it's natural to notice what you've missed. But remember, you're building your own life now. You have a place here, and you're part of a family too." Those words helped Maya understand that her past did not have to define her present. She began to engage more with Daniel and the land around them, learning new skills and taking responsibility for small tasks. She cooked simple meals with him, learned to tend the chickens, and even helped repair the cabin roof during a windy afternoon. Each task, no matter how small, gave her a sense of accomplishment and belonging. She realized that family was not only about love and protection, but also about sharing responsibilities, supporting each other, and growing together. Despite their isolation, Maya and Daniel were not completely cut off from the world. Occasionally, neighbors from nearby homesteads would visit, offering news or trade goods. At first, Maya had been wary, unsure if she could trust anyone outside of Daniel. But with each visit, she learned that kindness existed beyond the cabin walls. Some neighbors were curious about her, asking questions gently and including her in simple conversations. She realized that while some people could be unkind, many others could be helpful, patient, and caring. Each encounter strengthened her sense of community and belonging. One day, a boy from a nearby farm came by, curious about the cabin and the girl who lived there. Maya watched from behind the cabin as he approached Daniel, asking polite questions about the garden and the animals. Daniel introduced her, encouraging her to speak, and to Maya's surprise, she found herself talking freely. The boy asked about the plants she had grown and the animals she tended. She shared her knowledge confidently, and Daniel's encouraging smile never left her side. It was a small but significant moment. She was learning that her voice mattered, that she could contribute, and that others could value her presence. As the seasons changed, Maya also began to notice changes in herself. Her fears, once overwhelming and constant, became more manageable. She still remembered the pain of her past, but it no longer controlled her. She could laugh without fear, explore without anxiety, and take pride in her accomplishments without guilt. Her sense of self-worth grew daily, nurtured by Daniel's unwavering support and the life they were building together. The bond between them deepened further during quiet evenings. After long days of work, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories or simply enjoying the warmth. Sometimes Daniel would tell tales of his own childhood, of mistakes he had made, of lessons learned. Other times, Maya would share fragments of her memories, small stories that no one had ever listened to before. They listened to each other without judgment, learning that empathy and understanding could heal wounds that nothing else could. One memorable evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Daniel handed Maya a small, handmade wooden box. "This is for you," he said softly. Inside were little mementos of their life together, a smooth stone from the river, a pressed flower from the garden, and a small feather from a bird they had seen flying together. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she held the box. It was a symbol, a reminder that she was cherished, that her life mattered, and that she had a place where she belonged. Maya began to see that family was not just about living together under one roof. It was about shared experiences, mutual support, and the quiet moments that built trust and love over time. With Daniel, she learned that family could be formed through choice and care, not just birth. She began to take pride in their home, in their land, and in the small community they were part of. She learned to cook meals that others would enjoy, tend the garden so that it flourished, and care for the animals with patience and understanding. Each act, no matter how small, was a contribution to the life they were building together. As the months passed, Maya's confidence grew in ways that surprised even her. She could ride across the hills, help with repairs, and even navigate the forest trails with skill. She began to imagine a future where she could continue to learn, grow, and thrive. The cabin, the garden, the animals, and the land itself became symbols of her resilience and her newfound strength. She was no longer a frightened, abandoned child. She was a capable, strong young girl who had learned to trust, to love, and to be loved. One afternoon, a neighbor woman came to visit, bringing fresh-baked bread and news from the nearby town. Maya greeted her politely, speaking confidently and with ease. The woman smiled warmly and complimented her on the garden and her growing skills. Maya felt a rush of pride. For the first time, she realized that she was being recognized not only for surviving but for thriving. Her efforts mattered, her voice mattered, and she was part of a larger world that could see her worth. Evenings continued to be filled with quiet reflection. Maya would sit by the river or the cabin steps, watching the stars and thinking about how far she had come. She understood now that healing was a journey, one step at a time, supported by trust, care, and love. She no longer feared the future as she once had. Instead, she embraced it with courage, knowing that she had a family, a home, and a life worth living. By the time summer arrived, the cabin and its surroundings had transformed along with Maya. The garden flourished with vegetables and flowers, the animals were healthy and happy, and the cabin itself stood as a warm, welcoming place. Maya's laughter and energy filled the yard, a testament to her growth and resilience. Daniel watched her with quiet pride, knowing that the bond they shared had created a strong, loving family. They had faced hardship together, but they had also built a life filled with hope, trust, and joy. Maya had learned that life could be beautiful even after pain, that courage and patience could lead to healing, and that family could be formed through love, choice, and care. She had discovered that she was capable, strong, and deserving of happiness. And as she looked around the cabin, the garden, and the land she now called home, she understood something powerful, that love, trust, and perseverance could transform even the hardest beginnings into a life worth celebrating. The summer sun was high, spilling warmth over the cabin, the garden, and the surrounding hills. Maya had grown strong and confident, her laughter carrying across the valley as she ran through the fields and tended the animals. She had learned so much about the land, about responsibility, and about life itself. Yet even in this peaceful place, challenges were never far away. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, and Maya was about to discover that courage and trust could be tested in ways she had never imagined. It began with a storm. The sky darkened suddenly one afternoon, clouds rolling in faster than anyone could have anticipated. The wind picked up, bending trees and shaking the cabin. Daniel immediately began securing the animals, bringing chickens into the coop and tethering the horses. Maya followed his instructions carefully, her hands steady as she helped move supplies in close windows. The air was heavy with rain, and soon the storm broke in a torrent, water pouring down in sheets and turning the dirt paths to mud. For a while it seemed as though the storm would never end. The river, which had once been a gentle ribbon of water, began to swell, rushing angrily past the banks. Maya watched from the cabin window, her heart pounding with worry. "It's okay," Daniel said calmly, though his eyes were sharp with concern. "We've faced hard things before. We can handle this together." His words reassured her, and she felt a rush of determination. She would not be paralyzed by fear. She had learned to face challenges, and she would face this one too. The next hours were tense. Heavy rain and wind battered the cabin, rattling the windows and howling through the trees. Maya and Daniel worked together tirelessly, checking the animals, reinforcing the cabin's doors, and moving anything that might be swept away by the rising waters. Maya's hands ached from the work. Her body was soaked and cold, but she did not complain. She felt a strange sense of pride. This was not just survival, it was proving to herself that she could face danger and act with courage. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the valley soaked but intact. The river had returned to its gentle flow, and the garden, though battered, remained standing. Maya and Daniel sat by the fireplace, drying their clothes and sipping warm tea. Maya's hands still trembled from the adrenaline, but her spirit felt stronger than ever. She realized that facing challenges with someone she trusted made even the hardest moments bearable. That night, as she lay in bed, she understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. In the following weeks, life returned to a steady rhythm. Maya continued to work in the garden, tend the animals, and learn new skills from Daniel. But the storm had left its mark, not only on the land but on Maya's understanding of resilience. She began to take on more responsibility, repairing fences, guiding the younger animals, and even helping Daniel plan for the coming months. Each task reinforced her confidence and independence. She realized that she was not just surviving, she was contributing to a home, a family, and a life she could be proud of. One day, while exploring the forest near their cabin, Maya found a small, injured bird. Its wing was bent awkwardly, and it seemed too weak to fly. She picked it up gently and brought it back to the cabin. Daniel helped her tend to the bird, showing her how to care for it without causing further harm. Over the next few days, Maya nursed it carefully, feeding it and keeping it warm. Watching the bird regain its strength became a symbol of her own healing journey. Just as the bird was learning to fly again, Maya was learning to embrace life fully, to trust, and to believe in her own strength. Maya also began to consider the future more seriously. The cabin, the garden, and the land around them were more than a temporary refuge. They were a foundation. She thought about what she wanted her life to become, what kind of person she wanted to grow into. She realized that she could pursue knowledge, explore the world beyond the valley, and perhaps even help others who had faced hardships like hers. Daniel encouraged her to dream, reminding her that she had already overcome so much and that her potential was limitless. Their bond deepened in these moments of shared reflection. Daniel treated her not just as a child in need of care, but as a young person capable of thought, creativity, and leadership. Maya learned to make decisions, solve problems, and act responsibly. She felt a sense of empowerment she had never known. And Daniel, in turn, found joy in witnessing her growth, understanding that the love and care he had offered were now blossoming into independence, courage, and wisdom. One afternoon, word came from a neighboring homestead. A group of travelers was passing through, in need of shelter for the night. Daniel invited them to stay, and Maya helped prepare the cabin, offering food and comfort to the weary travelers. It was the first time she had actively welcomed strangers into their home. At first, she had felt nervous, unsure if she could trust anyone outside their small family. But as she interacted with the travelers, offering smiles and assistance, she realized that kindness could ripple outward. She saw the gratitude in their eyes and felt a deep satisfaction. She could be a source of comfort and care for others, just as Daniel had been for her. That evening, after the travelers had gone, Maya and Daniel sat by the fire. The warmth of the flames mirrored the warmth in her heart. "You've grown so much," Daniel said, his voice quiet but full of pride. "Not just in strength, but in courage, kindness, and wisdom. I've watched you transform, Maya, and I couldn't be prouder." Maya felt a wave of emotion. She had come so far, from a frightened, abandoned child to someone who could face storms, care for others, and dream about the future. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not only for Daniel but for the journey that had brought her here. Challenges continued to come, as they always would on the frontier. There were days when crops failed, when animals became sick, or when unexpected dangers threatened their peace. But Maya faced each challenge with determination and skill. She had learned to plan, act, and adapt. She had learned to rely on herself and to trust in Daniel's guidance. And most importantly, she had learned that love and support could give her the strength to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Maya also began to understand the true meaning of family. It was more than shared meals or a roof over one's head. Family was about trust, protection, encouragement, and shared responsibility. It was about celebrating successes together and offering comfort during hardships. It was about the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the gentle guidance, the simple gestures of care. In Daniel, Maya had found a family built not by chance but by choice, and she cherished it deeply. One day, as they walked along the riverbank, Maya paused to look at her reflection in the water. She saw a young girl with bright eyes, strong arms, and a confident posture. The girl staring back at her was not the same frightened child who had been sold for $2 months ago. This was a young person who had faced pain, survived hardship, and embraced life with courage and hope. Maya smiled at her reflection, realizing that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. As the seasons changed again, Maya's place in the world became clearer. She had a home, a mentor, and a family in Daniel. She had learned skills that would allow her to thrive, connections with neighbors that enriched her life, and the confidence to dream about a future she had once thought impossible. She understood that life would always have challenges, but she now had the tools, courage, and support to face them. One memorable evening, a golden sunset painted the valley in warm hues. Maya and Daniel sat on the porch steps, watching the river flow lazily in the distance. Maya leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his presence. "I feel like I belong here," she said softly. Daniel smiled, nodding. "You do, and you always will. We've built this together and nothing can take it away." Those words filled her heart with peace. She knew that the past, though painful, had led her to this moment, a life filled with trust, love, and hope. The journey from fear to courage, from abandonment to belonging, had not been easy. Maya had faced storms, both literal and emotional, and had overcome them through resilience, determination, and the support of someone who truly cared for her. She had discovered her own strength, learned to trust, and embrace the joy of family, community, and a life worth living. And as the stars twinkled above, reflecting in the river below, Maya realized something profound. She was no longer defined by the hardships she had endured or the small price others had placed on her. She was defined by her courage, her kindness, and the love she had found and nurtured. She was Maya, strong, hopeful, and ready to face the future. With Daniel by her side, she knew she could meet whatever came next with confidence, grace, and an unshakable sense of belonging. The frontier remained wild and unpredictable, but Maya had learned that she was not alone. She had a family, a home, and a future filled with possibilities. Her journey had transformed her from a frightened child into a young girl capable of love, courage, and resilience. And in that transformation, she discovered the most powerful truth of all, that no matter how difficult life might begin, it could always lead to hope, connection, and a life worth celebrating. THS, she was not being pushed, yelled at, or sold like an object. She was being led somewhere by someone who had chosen her. The cowboy walked steadily, his boots crunching in the dirt. He did not speak much, giving her space to take in her surroundings. Every now and then he glanced at her, his gaze calm but attentive, as if checking that she was still with him without needing to ask. She noticed the small things, the way his hat shaded his face from the sun, the way his hand rested lightly on the saddlebag slung across his shoulder, the steady rhythm of his steps. There was a quiet confidence in him, a sense that he knew the world could be harsh but that he could face it anyway. At first, she hesitated to speak. Words felt dangerous. She had been punished too many times for saying too much. But as they walked, the cowboy finally broke the silence. "What's your name?" he asked gently. His voice was soft, not demanding, just curious. She swallowed hard. No one had asked her that question in a long time. She had been stripped of her identity, called by numbers, prices, or cruel names that left scars deeper than the ones on her skin. After a long pause, she whispered, "Maya." "Maya," he repeated, as if tasting the name and liking it. "That's a good name." His words were simple, but they carried warmth. Maya felt a strange flutter in her chest. No one had ever said her name like it belonged to her, like it mattered. The path they followed led them to the edge of a small river, its waters clear and cold. The cowboy stopped and gestured toward it. "We'll get some water here. You must be thirsty." Maya nodded, stepping closer to the riverbank. She cupped her hands and dipped them into the water, drinking slowly. The cool liquid ran down her throat, washing away some of the dryness and dust that had clung to her for days. The cowboy watched quietly, letting her have this moment of relief. After drinking, Maya sat on a smooth rock, her arms wrapped around her knees. She felt exposed, still small and fragile, but something about the cowboy's calm presence made it easier to breathe. He sat nearby, unhurried, not forcing conversation but leaving space for her to gather her thoughts. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Where are we going?" The cowboy smiled faintly. "Somewhere safe, somewhere you can rest. You won't have to worry about anyone hurting you anymore." His words were steady, comforting, and Maya felt a flicker of hope. Could it really be true? Could there really be a place where she did not have to be afraid all the time? The journey continued. They walked through fields where wildflowers struggled to bloom in the dry soil, past hills that rolled gently into the distance. Maya noticed the sound she had almost forgotten, the rustle of the wind through the grass, the chirping of birds in the trees, the distant clatter of hooves on hard ground. Each sound was small, but to her, it felt like a reminder that the world was not entirely cruel. Along the way, Maya began to notice small gestures from the cowboy that made her feel seen. He pointed out animal tracks in the dirt, explaining what they belonged to. He showed her how to avoid certain plants that could sting or make her sick. He even picked a few wild berries and offered them to her. "Try these," he said with a gentle grin. "Sweet and safe." Maya hesitated, then took one. The flavor burst on her tongue, sharp and sweet, and she smiled despite herself. It was strange to feel a small joy after so much pain, but it reminded her that life could still hold good things. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, the cowboy led her to a small cabin nestled at the edge of a wooded area. It was simple, made of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a small garden that had clearly been tended with care. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint smell of cooking filled the air. Maya's eyes widened. She had never seen a place like this, a place that felt both real and safe. The cowboy opened the door and gestured inside. "This will be your home, at least for now. There's a bed for you and food is already on the stove." Maya stepped inside cautiously. The cabin was modest but warm, filled with sunlight and the soft creak of the wooden floor. She could see pots and pans hanging neatly, a small table with chairs, and a fireplace that promised warmth on cold nights. It was nothing like the crowded, harsh places she had been forced to live before. It was home. Over the next few days, Maya began to adjust to her new life. The cowboy, whose name she learned was Daniel, did not rush her. He allowed her to eat slowly, to explore the cabin, to sit by the river and watch the water flow. He showed her how to care for the small garden, how to mend her clothes, how to help with simple chores around the cabin. Each day, Maya grew a little stronger, a little more confident, a little more willing to trust. Evenings were the hardest. At night, the memories of her past returned in waves. She dreamed of the people who had hurt her, of the loneliness that had clung to her like a shadow. But Daniel was patient. He would sit quietly near her, sometimes reading aloud from a worn book, sometimes just keeping watch, never pressing her to speak, never judging her for her fears. Slowly, she learned that she could share her thoughts without being punished. Slowly, she began to realize that someone cared for her simply because she existed. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Daniel spoke about his own life. He had been alone for many years, wandering from town to town, taking odd jobs, never staying in one place for long. He had lost people he cared about and had learned that the world was unpredictable and often harsh. But he had also learned that small acts of kindness could make a difference, that even one person could change another person's life. Maya listened, intrigued. She had never met anyone like him before, someone who understood loss but still believed in doing the right thing. The days turned into weeks, and Maya began to feel the first stirrings of real happiness. She laughed when Daniel made a clumsy joke about chasing chickens out of the garden. She smiled when she harvested the first tomatoes of the season. She even began to talk about her past, sharing pieces of her story in small fragments, testing the waters of trust. Each time she spoke, Daniel listened without interruption, without judgment, without pity. He simply nodded, acknowledged her pain, and reminded her gently that she was safe now. Maya started to notice changes in herself too. She felt stronger in her body and mind. She learned to carry water without spilling it, to chop wood without hesitation, to cook simple meals with care. Each accomplishment gave her a sense of pride she had never experienced before. More importantly, she began to believe that she deserved these small victories, that she deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. It was a new and powerful feeling, one that began to replace the fear and shame she had carried for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Maya sat by the river, skipping stones across the water. Daniel joined her, sitting quietly on the bank. For a long time, neither spoke. They just watched the river flow, feeling the peace that came with shared silence. Then Daniel said softly, "You know, Maya, the world can be a cruel place, but it can also be full of beauty. Sometimes it just takes time to find it." Maya nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. She had seen cruelty, yes, and she had felt the sting of rejection and fear. But she had also seen kindness, patience, and the first glimmers of love. She had learned that even in a harsh world, people could care, people could protect, people could make life better. And most importantly, she had learned that she was not alone anymore. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Maya realized that her life was changing. She no longer had to hide or shrink from the world. She had a place to rest, a person to trust, and a glimmer of hope that one day she could build a life filled with joy, not just survival. And though the past would always be a part of her, it no longer had to define her. With Daniel by her side, she felt the first real sense of belonging she had ever known. For the first time in many months, Maya allowed herself to believe that the future could be bright. And in that quiet, gentle moment by the river, she understood something powerful, that even the smallest acts of courage, trust, and kindness could change a life forever. Life at the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, one that was very different from the chaos Maya had known before. The days were long and filled with work, but the work was not cruel or punishing. Instead, it was purposeful, a way to care for themselves and the small piece of land they now called home. Every morning, Maya woke before sunrise, the soft pink light of dawn spilling across the cabin walls. She would stretch her stiff limbs and glance at Daniel, who was already outside tending to the animals or checking the fences. He would nod at her with a small smile, a silent greeting that reminded her she was no longer alone. At first, Maya moved slowly through the tasks. Her body was sore from months of abuse and neglect, and her hands were raw from the rough work she had endured. Even fetching water from the river felt like an impossible chore some days. But Daniel was patient. He never scolded her for mistakes or rushed her to work faster. Instead, he showed her how to balance the bucket, how to step carefully over rocks, and how to conserve energy without giving up. Each time she succeeded, he offered a quiet nod or a brief smile, and Maya felt a spark of pride. For the first time, she realized that effort could lead to accomplishment, and accomplishment could lead to joy. The cabin itself became a place of learning. Daniel had a small collection of books, worn and patched but full of knowledge about the world beyond the hills. Some were about plants and animals, some about history, and a few were stories meant to entertain. At first, Maya hesitated to read. She had been denied education before, and words felt strange and foreign to her. But Daniel encouraged her gently, showing her letters and sounds, teaching her one word at a time. Soon, she could read simple sentences, and the pride in her eyes was unmistakable. Each word she mastered made her feel stronger, as if she were reclaiming a part of herself that had been lost. Maya's nights were still hard. Memories of the past often visited her when she tried to sleep. Faces she had known, some kind and many cruel, would appear in her dreams. She would wake with a shiver, her small body curling into itself. But Daniel always noticed. He would leave the door open so she could hear the river nearby, or he would sit quietly by her bed, his presence a silent reassurance. Sometimes he would tell her stories of his own childhood, stories of places he had visited and the small adventures he had had. His voice was steady and calm, and it slowly replaced the fear in her heart with a sense of safety. Over time, Maya began to explore the land around the cabin. The small forest behind the home became her secret world, a place where she could wander, climb trees, and watch the birds build nests. Daniel often accompanied her, showing her which plants were edible and which were dangerous, teaching her how to move quietly to avoid startling animals. Maya felt a thrill in learning these skills. Each new lesson was a small victory, a reminder that she was capable and resourceful. She began to see herself not as a helpless child, but as someone who could survive, adapt, and even thrive. The work was not easy, and there were moments of frustration. Maya struggled to balance the chores, to remember Daniel's instructions, and to keep up with the daily demands of frontier life. Some days, she felt overwhelmed, her old fears threatening to creep back in. But Daniel never let her give up. He would kneel beside her, showing her step by step how to accomplish the task. He would celebrate her small successes, whether it was planting a row of seeds straight or mending a fence properly. These moments, simple as they were, became the building blocks of her confidence and self-esteem. Maya also began to open her heart slowly. She shared small pieces of her story with Daniel, bits of her life before she was captured. She told him about her village, the games she used to play with her siblings, the songs her mother sang at night. Each time she spoke, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she had carried alone for far too long. Daniel listened with patience and care, never interrupting or judging, always offering quiet support. In return, he shared stories of his own struggles, of losses and challenges, and of the people he had met who had shown him kindness along the way. Through these shared stories, a bond of trust and understanding grew between them, strong and unspoken. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Maya noticed the first signs of life returning to the garden. Tiny sprouts peeked through the dark, wet soil, and the flowers she had planted before the storm had survived, their petals glistening with raindrops. She felt a rush of excitement and ran to show Daniel. "Look," she exclaimed. "They're still alive." He smiled warmly and ruffled her hair. "Just like you," he said softly, "strong even after the hardest storms." Those words stayed with Maya, a reminder that she too could endure hardships and emerge stronger. As the weeks turned into months, Maya grew not only in strength but in understanding of the world around her. She learned how to track animals, how to forage for food, and how to use tools safely. She discovered that her small hands could carry heavy water buckets, her legs could climb hills she had once thought impossible, and her mind could solve problems she had feared were beyond her. Each skill she mastered brought a sense of independence and pride she had never known before. But it was not only physical skills that grew. Maya's heart began to heal in ways she had not thought possible. She laughed more freely, smiled without hesitation, and even began to dream about a future beyond survival. She found joy in simple things, the warmth of the sun on her face, the laughter of birds in the trees, the quiet peace of the river at dusk. And most importantly, she learned the power of trust and connection. With Daniel, she discovered that love and care could be given freely, without expectation or fear. There were moments of difficulty too. Sometimes, Maya's past would return in sharp bursts of fear or sadness. She would freeze while doing chores, flashbacks of cruelty making her heart race. But Daniel never forced her to face these moments alone. He would sit with her, hold her hand, and guide her gently back to the present. Slowly, she learned to face these memories, to accept them as part of her story but not as the whole of it. Each time she overcame a moment of fear, she felt a little stronger, a little braver. The bond between Maya and Daniel grew into something unspoken but powerful. It was more than just care, it was family. Daniel treated her as a daughter, teaching her, protecting her, and allowing her to grow at her own pace. Maya in turn began to rely on him, trust him, and finally believe that she could belong somewhere. They worked together, laughed together, and sometimes sat in silence together, sharing the quiet peace of the frontier. Each day reinforced the idea that she was not just surviving anymore, she was living, growing, and becoming whole again. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence near the edge of the forest, Maya paused to catch her breath. She looked around at the land, the cabin, the garden, and the river winding through the valley. It was not a grand or perfect world, but it was hers to explore, to care for, and to call home. She realized, for the first time in a long while, that she felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She felt safe, valued, and loved. The memories of pain and loss were still there, but they no longer defined her. She had survived, and now she was beginning to thrive. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything in gold and amber, Maya sat on a log and watched the river reflect the colors of the evening. Daniel came up beside her, carrying a small basket of berries he had picked earlier. He handed them to her with a smile, and they ate together in quiet contentment. There were no words needed to explain the depth of their connection. It was understood in every gesture, every glance, every shared moment of peace and work. That night, as Maya lay in her small bed, she felt the steady rhythm of the cabin around her, the soft creak of the floor, the distant murmur of the river, the gentle breathing of Daniel in the next room. She thought about how far she had come in just a few months. From a frightened, abandoned child, she had grown into a brave, capable young girl who could face the world and its challenges. She realized that healing was not a single event, but a journey, one step at a time, guided by trust, care, and patience. Maya closed her eyes with a sense of peace she had never known before. The frontier was still a wild and unpredictable place, but it was also full of possibilities. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. She had learned that kindness could be a shield against cruelty. And she had learned, most importantly, that family could be chosen, and love could heal even the deepest wounds. For the first time in her young life, Maya felt a true sense of hope. It was quiet, steady, and persistent, like the river flowing past the cabin. It told her that the world, though harsh, could also hold beauty, warmth, and love. And with Daniel by her side, she knew she would face whatever came next with courage, strength, and the knowledge that she was never alone again.